So I'm Christine Moffitt. I'm part of the League of Women Voters Natural Resource team here, and I am a fisheries scientist. Been in the business for about 50 years. I am studying the rail link part of this with partner Steve Miller, and so I'm going to give a portion of it, and then we're going to have Steve give another portion of it. And Steve has been in our group, our study group, since we formed, and he is also a fisheries scientist, but he has been very engaged in the railroad for a number of years, has a heritage of dealing with railroads. So that's sort of my introduction here. I'm going to approach this as how we're going to move the containers that are going to come into the ships or come out on the ships to rail, and how they're going to get in and out of Eugene, which is the destination to a Class 1 railroad. Those of you that know the area know that the Coos Bay rail link runs through some pretty amazing country, and when it was first constructed, and because of the terrain, it's a very wavy pathway, and it follows the coast up to Florence and then moves in the Siuslaw drainage until it goes over the hill into the valley of the Willamette. So we've got 121 bridges and 12 cross large lakes and 9 tunnels along that road. The history is really interesting. It was a major effort here over 100 years ago to develop this rail line to connect from Powers all the way to Eugene. It really was quite a feat and quite a legacy, and was important to communicate and transfer goods and services into the valley. Recently, the Central Oregon and Pacific Railroad in 2007 rapidly shuttered all the operations and really turned the Coos Bay into an isolated area for the shipping that they were doing of forest products and some ag components. And so the port stood up and really worked hard to try to restore railroad service. And by 2011, they were able to reopen the line all the way to Eugene. The port itself has been interested in the concept of a container port for many years. It started in the 2000s when they were doing some preliminary assessments and trying to attract some customers. One of the big international customers that looked at the Coos Bay port was the Maersk company, and they are among the largest and very integrated. They studied for a while and did quite a few reports that we've been able to see, and in 2007 they abandoned the idea. So how does this fit in terms of rail transport of these containers? Now, Jan explained that the traditional size for container ships is usually the 20 or the 40-foot long containers. The way that they're sized is that they have the same width and height so that they can be stacked, whether they're a 20-foot or a 40-foot container. But as Jan remarked, the majority of the containers in these larger ships are really the 40-foot. A number of items can be in containers, and there's a lot of rules, and we'll go through some of that in just a little bit. But manufactured goods are certainly common, people think about in container ships. But there's also quite a demand and interest in temperature-controlled systems. So there's shipping of seafood and ag products and medicines in these containers. Also, humidified control can be done to transport things like coffee and cocoa, oversized construction materials, and also a number of bulk hazardous or non-hazardous chemicals can be shipped in container vessels. This is international trade, and so with that, there are a lot of international regulations that have been set up to standardize the shipping so that things are transferable from one nation to another. And the International Organization for Standardization has worked hard with the international shipping community to have a common dimensions, structural strength given the kind of commodity that's in each one of the containers, establishing proper coding and identification tools and marking of the outside of containers. The second component in some of the regulations is the U.S. Customs and Border Protection that's very much in the news these days. But the role of Customs and Border Protection also involves their inspecting and verifying the contents of containers, justifying what's coming in, collecting tariffs, and all of those components are part of this. And the unique thing about the Port of Coos Bay, it's one of the two ports in Oregon that is a foreign trade zone. The other is Portland. So this could be conducted there, and we do have Customs and Border Protection Office here in town. There's federal regulations of the safety and all the components of railroad transport, and that's under the Federal Railroad Administration that oversees regulations for the bridges, culverts, and tunnels. And we're going to also be introducing the role of the states. Every state has to have a plan as well. But the feds have hazmat rules, and then another independent agency within the federal government is that provides guidance and regulates the rates and services for each one of the train lines, and that's the Surface Transportation Board. So I'm going to run you through a little bit of what we know about how the containers would move to and from Coos Bay. Where on the Pacific Coast, we have a strong Pacific Coast Union Longshoremen Workers Group, and they would be engaged in unloading the ships, moving things within a yard, loading and unloading the trains, and handling all of the operations in a container port area. To do that, then the products or whatever's in the containers would be placed on single rail and double stacked, and then the next step would be to assemble those in trains. So you have various stages along the line for that. And given the statistics that are available for the 2 million TEUs, again, repeating what Jan said already, we've been told there'll be 6 trains per day and 6 trains returning per day. So we did some estimates of 257 workday per year, and then figured out how many containers would have to be made into double-stacked rail cars, and figured out the length. So these are just some of the assumptions that we've made, but we figure that about 170 loaded double-stacked rail cars, 10,000-foot long train. How much money has been spent so far to modify the rail to keep it up and running since the 2007 shutdown? There have been a lot of improvements, and they've been very busy repairing different portions, tracks, ties, tunnels, but we know more modifications would be needed. The transportation rail grant that was received in the fall has been there for planning, reliability, the safety, and the capacity of what would be needed to carry the 2 million TEUs on the track, which would need rehabilitation, new sidings, improvements in the rail yard, and upgrades. And I just note that there's a cost share on this. Just a few photos of what some of the uncontrolled crossings look like, which are would be affected by long trains, and some of the speed limits would have to be really carefully watched, because when you're running a 1.8 mile train, you have to worry about the radius of your turns and the slopes. Here's some of the bridges that were that are in present in use, and they are actually beyond their expected lifespan. The clearance for the tunnels would have to be increased to accommodate the capacity of double stacked rails. And here's a picture of the different tunnels along the length of the transit to Eugene. The other thing that's really important is when you have long trains, the existing sidings, we have there's a one rail line. So if there's a train that's coming in the other direction, you have to move to a siding. The siding has to be long enough to accommodate that train. So all of the sidings would have to be lengthened to accommodate longer trains. So I'm going to switch gears now and have Stephen come up, and he's going to give you the rest of the presentation.
So the trains would be arriving in Eugene. The existing trains are about 2 per day, one to the Eugene area and one back to Coos Bay. They're about 1,500 feet long. That's an approximation. And I can't go 28 or 30 rail cars and 2 engines running to and from Eugene. And then the planned additional traffic is quite considerable. There would be adding 12 trains per day. There would be 6 to the Eugene area and 6 back to Coos Bay. They would be up to 10,000 feet long, based on a presentation that we've seen from the Port of Coos Bay, where the sidings are going to be extended to 10,000 feet, proposed to be. And of course, they would be using those sidings, or expect to be using them eventually. The Eugene Rail Yard major expansion is estimated to cost $104,489,000. Arriving in Eugene, the overhead satellite view of the rail yard and its surrounding community is pretty striking. A lot of the housing has been built since Southern Pacific pulled out some of its rail cars, or not rail cars, but some of its tracks when the timber shipping dropped off, and houses have been built on the northeast side and also the southwest side, 2 neighborhoods that surround the rail yard. It's expected that increased coupling and uncoupling of rail cars and metal impacts will occur as locomotives move rail cars around the yard to add to the trains day and night. We don't know what nuisance noise concerns might appear from the added train traffic, though, from the proposed PCIP. Noise complaints have been received from nearby residents over the years. So the Coos Bay rail line delivers cargo to Eugene, and in Eugene, management changes in the former Union Pacific Yard have occurred. April 8th, the Surface Transportation Board authorized the Central Oregon and Pacific Railroad to lease and operate approximately 27.5 miles of line in Eugene, allowing Union Pacific to transfer local service to Corp Railroad, including the rail yard. Corp was the rail line that abandoned the Coos Bay line in 2007. With Union Pacific free of rail yard switching operations, it will then be able to promptly couple sets of locomotives to take long trains to depart the rail yard. What happens after the trains leave Eugene? Well, there are routes that go north and south out of the rail yard. There's a Portland connection that goes east and west on lines, and then there's the south route that goes to Reno with other options there. If the trains go out of Eugene to Portland, which would be likely, siding links would probably have to be lengthened and congestion in Portland neighborhoods will have to be addressed. Table 32 is a table of the project costs. On the left-hand panel, there are two major boxes, and one of them at the top has rail segment 1 and rail segment 2 with costs, and we haven't been able to determine what those rail segments apply to, those expenses. The box below, the Eugene Rail Yard, is that $104,489,000 amount to do a number of different activities. Now Tom Guevara with the Oregon Department of Transportation will describe and discuss the Reedsport Railroad Crossing study. The study was necessary to plan for the potentially large increase in rail travel through Reedsport day and night if the CIP is built. Tom is the Senior Transportation Planner and Agency Project Manager for ODOT Region 3.
Good evening, everybody. I only have 10 slides, so I'll run through this pretty quick. I think you've already heard the description of the port expansion. I'm Tom Guevara. I'm with the Oregon Department of Transportation, and I was ODOT's project manager for the Reedsport rail crossing study. So let me give you a little background. A couple years ago, the port approached us, and we were in discussions of this proposed expansion. And the concern was that the port's expansion was going to create rail traffic that was going to block Highway Oregon 38 in Reedsport and Winchester Avenue rail crossings. And it was important to ODOT that Oregon 38 is a regional highway. It's one of the few connectors between 101 and I-5, and we wanted to make sure that before the port actually got to construction, we had a plan in place that we could identify what improvements would be needed to those rail crossings. So when we did this, we worked closely with the port, and there was some assumptions because nobody really knew at that time what the actual project would be. So let me give you a little background on the purpose of the study. The purpose of the study was to evaluate the impacts of anticipated increase in rail activity on traffic operations and safety in Reedsport, specifically at the Oregon 38 and the Winchester Avenue rail crossings. So the study area, we just looked at this. This is the rail line. The star was what we were specifically looking at in Reedsport. And this was the specific study area that we looked at the two rail crossings in the city of Reedsport, the Oregon 38 and the Winchester Avenue rail crossings. So in doing the assumptions, at the time it was like, what's a reasonable assumption for the port expansion on, so we can do the traffic analysis. And in doing it, what we identified was what's existing today were 2 trains per day, about 1,500 feet, travel about 10 miles per hour. With the port's proposed expansion, we were going to go to 14 trains per day. That's 7 out to Eugene, 7 back from Eugene to Coos Bay. Averaging about 1,500 to 4,000 feet, double stacked trains with a 25 mile per hour train speed. Now, we didn't use a 25 mile per hour train speed because the Umpqua Bridge is not designed to support that speed, so we stayed with the 10 mile per hour train speed. What the analysis showed with this assumption in the port expansion is that we were going to get vehicle queues on Oregon 38 that spilled back on the 101 and block the 101 and 38 intersection. We were going to get signal cycle failures at the 38-101 intersection in Reedsport, and we were going to have delays up to 5.5 minutes at the Oregon 38 and Winchester Avenue. Local circulation and access delays up to 60 seconds on the side streets, and traffic volume increases with traffic rerouting to Port Dock Bay in Reedsport. So this was what the train would look like at a 4,000 foot train going 10 miles per hour through Reedsport. We would be looking at increased probability of delays of emergency service vehicles, increased train horn noise during school and nighttime hours, increased pedestrian and train conflicts, and increased peak hour queues on 38 and Winchester Avenue. So the solutions that we came up with was, after we studied it and we looked at various alternatives, we worked with the local government and the public, and what was selected was raising the highway over the railroad tracks with what we call the Oregon 38 overpass. For the Winchester Avenue one, or here's another look at it. This is a side view. So what you're looking at is the overpass looking north, crossing Winchester Avenue at grade. And here's an aerial of the overpass. Well, the overpass, what we were looking at is building it on retaining walls, so we didn't require additional right-of-way, and it was going to start separating at 5th Street on the east side, and it's going to land approximately just before Myrtle Avenue on the west side of the tracks. Here's the 4-quadrant gate at Winchester Avenue. And in this project, what we identified was to improve safety. It's going to have some pedestrian crossings, some pedestrian gates, and it would include flashers on the gate and the arms for pedestrians. That concludes the presentation. Unless we have any questions that we're going to